Buongiorno, grazie a tutti e tutte. Hello, once again. Yesterday, I dedicated the first session of this seminar to establish the map of the main political concepts that define the beginning of the contemporary period in relation to the Arab political thought. We mentioned and explained the importance of nationalism, pan-Arabism, and the different risks and dynamics these visions entail. Also, it's the positive aspects and how they tried through the theory of Baathism as a particular example of these theories, in the case especially of Iraq, how it tried to change or improve, and however didn't succeed neither in theory nor in practice to create a better situation for the country. But it was interesting to see how it elaborated its different arguments. Today, I'm going to focus on in theory, current issue, which is the occupation of Palestine, that we will see that it's not so current, but it has a very long history that I will try to explain. I would like to use as a starting point very specific methodological approach, which is conceptual history, to analyze how the different concepts have evolved and have changed, and also what I call philosophy of international relationships, which is to analyze geopolitics from a philosophical perspective, not only in the surface, but also deep in the roots and origins of the conflict I'm going to explain. One tool we have to analyze these international relationships from a philosophical point of view is the critique to chronofetishism, which is a Marxist term that some Marxist philosophers of international relationships, I'm thinking about Benno Teschke, whose reading was the one who brought me that idea of the critique of chronofetishism used. What is the meaning of chronofetishism? Is the idea that sometimes some dates are fetishized, become like milestones of geopolitics, and we forget what came before and probably what will come after that. It is important to create a context to analyze how these milestones don't appear from nothing, but they have a context of emergence. And that allows us to have this conceptual approach I have mentioned to see precisely the evolution of events, of historical events, also the evolution of the concepts that conform these trends of action. That is the first point I wanted to highlight. The second is related to my goal and my objective, which is to overcome the realpolitik vision, which is very dominant in international relationships, the mere description of what happened, and to conceive geopolitics as a mere game of political actors interested in their own benefit. And it's true that it's very useful to understand the different movements of geopolitics, but my view consists on doing a critique to that approach, because I consider that at the end, the description of realpolitik has some kind of approval of the description it entails, because it assumes that that is the frame where everything takes place. And my goal is to open that frame to incorporate some other visions that also are part of politics. And that's part of the thesis I mentioned yesterday about victims and survivors. I don't want to advance contents, but my idea, to give only a hint, is that victims are victims, and that is what realpolitik shows to us, that victims are suffering, that people are being assassinated. But if we forget the aspect of how they are able to build new horizons, new perspectives, how they do survive, and how they try to overcome their situation. We will be also giving merit to these people, to these victims, and transforming their role. I said yesterday as well that a third step will be to admit and to acknowledge that they have also a geopolitical role. That is too much to say, so I will keep it aside for the moment, and I will continue later. A third methodological step would be to dismantle some myths that are a very important part of the descriptions of the, I don't like saying the conflict, the Palestinian conflict, because it seems that there is like a synonym between Palestine and conflicts, and language is very important. Let's say the occupation, the legal occupation of Palestine by part of the state of Israel. And I would like to dismantle, as I've said, these different myths. I will start with the first. Following that line of critique of chronofetishism, it is important to stress the idea that these events that we are observing since more or less last year didn't start the 7th of October, even if that supposed change somehow. We could establish like first beginning, but I insist we could go even back in time to the end of the 19th century, also to see how this joins my speech of yesterday. The end of the 19th century, when many events are taking place. I said the rise of nationalism, of pan-Arabism, and meanwhile, in the Russian Empire, the first pogroms against the Jewish people were taking place, okay, at the end of the 19th century. So these people who are suffering this violence in the Russian Empire are encouraged to buy lands in Palestine. Some of them are very, very well-known families, very rich families. Think about, well, I will not say names. I will avoid saying names, but you have many bibliography that explains how these wealthy families tried to buy and to change the Ottoman law to acquire the land and the properties of people who were living in Palestine. Okay? So they were expelled from Europe, and they tried to find a way to survive in Palestine. We start to see here the economic aspect that I mentioned yesterday, an economic aspect that existed in the 19th century and that exists today, and that is related to that ownership of the property, right? And then in 1882, I'm following the descriptions of Ilan Pappé, in case you want to take a look to that. He has many books. He's a historian, non-Zionist historian from Israel, who works in Brighton. And he describes how in 1882, so just after or during those pogroms in the Russian Empire, the first colons arrived in Palestine. And they were university students who didn't know how to work the land they have arrived in Palestine. They didn't know how to take care of the fields, so they received the help of the Palestinian workers who dedicated their lives to the fields, to agricultural activities. This is important because that destroys the first myth that Zionism uses. The first myth of Zionism, or one of them, is that they transformed the desert into a very fertile area, into an oasis, into a garden, let's say. Okay? This includes many ideas related to how Zionism and Orientalism works, which is the consideration of the others, of native peoples, in this case of Palestinian people, as non-cultivated people who is not able to know how to take care of their lands, who don't have techniques, who don't have the knowledge, and who don't deserve, therefore, according to this Zionist speech, who don't deserve to be in the land they belong to, right? Looking and reading history, we find out that that myth is simply a myth. It's not true. That Palestinian people have always been, due to their origin as people who worked in agricultural tasks, very linked to the earth, that they knew how to work and how to take care of their lands, and that Zionism only included that technical, industrial factor of machines, of techniques, but that didn't have that bond I mentioned yesterday of love and connection to the earth, because this was colonial business to do, as Theodor Herzl himself justifies in his book. He explains, without hiding it, that Zionism is a business activity and that it needs people to carry out that business in Palestine, in a book where he doesn't mention at all the existence of native people, of Arabs, or of Palestinians, right? So we see that actually the first colons who arrived there were university students, so they didn't have that knowledge and were taught by Palestinians how to do it. We are observing here how this conception of alterity that Edward Said, this Palestinian author, explains very well works, that I also expressed yesterday with this Cartesian view, which develops itself since the 17th century. The others don't have the same value as those who are going there to carry out the colonialist activity. The others, in this case, the Arabs, are conceived by Zionism as inferior, as incapable, as not having any political or any cultural characteristic, and that starts creating an image of the Arabs, and in this case of Palestinian people, of dehumanization, of lack of humanization. And that will lead us to the animalization of people until our current days. This is a very long process. Some images we see today can't happen simply from one day to the other. It is the product and the result of decades, not to say centuries, let's say decades of a process of the humanization of the other, and in this case of the Palestinian people. So this is the beginning of how these first colons are arriving to Palestine and are starting to get Palestinian lands through this attempt of getting the properties and the land. We are talking about the 19th century, right? It is also important to mention, I should have done it before, some puntualization on the concepts. Another strategy of Zionism is making equal or similar concepts as anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And this is very important to be clarified. Anti-Zionism is a position against an ideology and a movement, as Zionism is, which has a colonial goal and practice colonial and racist actions against Palestinians. So to be anti-Zionist is simply to have a political stance against this occupation of Palestine. It is not related at all with religion or with ethnicity. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, for the simple reason that Palestinian people are a Semitic people as well. And this is not, this accusation that some people receive of being anti-Semitic because they defend the Palestinian cause is it's hard, and it's made on purpose, because by doing that, by equiparating the critic to a specific politics to a critic to a racist view on the Jewish people, they are canceling any attempt to do precisely that critique against the state of Israel. So it's very important to clarify that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. It has nothing to do with religion or with ethnicity. It's a political critique. And second, Zionism, by doing that, is denying the Semitic character of the Palestinian people. And that is part of the strategy of denying the existence itself of Palestinians. I will explain later on, but it's part of their strategy to state that the Palestinian people don't exist. Seems strange or weird to say that, but Zionist statements affirm that Palestinians as such don't exist, that they are Arabs, and due to that, they should join their Arab brothers or cousins in different countries, in different Arab countries, but not being there. So when we say that as anti-Zionist position is anti-Semitic, it's important to remember that it's false. And second, that people will be forgetting and denying what Palestinians are, that Palestinians are Semitic. So probably the most anti-Semitic action today is precisely to attack and to murder Palestinian people. But this rhetoric, I'm sure you will have heard about it, and it's very present everywhere. And as I said, it's a very important pillar of the Zionist speech, which also has a very important role in constructing concepts, rhetoric, arguments, counter-arguments, and that's why it's important to do the counter argumentation. In 1897, the first Zionist Congress took place. Okay? They were suffering this terrible violence in Europe, so they started organizing themselves, and they started thinking. They continued thinking about occupying these Palestinian lands. In 1918, 6% of the population in Palestine were Jewish colons. There was a 5% of autochthonous Jewish population. So we will see how the number will increase. The number of
5% Jewish population, and how many colons?
6% colons and 5% native Jewish people in Palestine. The rest of the population, native Palestinians, both Muslim and Christian. I mentioned the name of Theodor Herzl, an Austrian Jewish who wrote this book of the Jewish state and this business colonial program, which he doesn't hide. And there is also a very important character who is Weizmann, this Russian Jewish who created like a group of Russians in Great Britain to expel the Jewish communist. This is important because part of the reject that the Jewish population suffer in Europe, and the reason why especially British politicians reinforce or encourage the occupation of Palestine is related to their own anti-Judaism, their own anti-Semitism. Okay, if we consider anti-Semitism only as anti-Judaism, I would say anti-Judaism. They wanted to expel Jewish people because they didn't want the British politicians, the Jewish, in their country, and especially in the European East, in the east of Europe, that reject of communists also contributed to their expulsion. Then in 1917, 1 year before of the numbers I've told you, a very important event took place, which is Balfour declaration. Okay? Balfour is a very important character because he wanted to establish a law to avoid Jewish people to arrive to Great Britain. Okay? At the same time, he was the one to establish this famous leitmotif of creating a national homeland for the Jewish people. He was insisting and he was encouraging that national homeland for the Jewish people without mentioning the existence of the native population of Palestine. Balfour was also related to the techniques of torture that were being exercised in Ireland. That explains many things that are happening today. That support of the Irish population and Irish government, especially I think it was Ireland, Spain, and I don't remember if Norway, the first countries to openly express their support to Palestine along this last year. In Ireland, the feeling and the support towards the Palestinian people is very vivid because they experienced colonialism inside Europe by the British government. And it was Balfour which exported the techniques of torture, the same techniques of torture from Ireland to Palestine. Okay? And we should study if he had also some presence in South Africa. Again, it's not by chance that South Africa was the country which presented this accusation of genocide against Israel to international courts, right? So there is like a triangle between Ireland, South Africa, and Palestine, and especially Ireland, Palestine, with Balfour as a very important actor in this situation. In Ireland, we can see also how hunger was used as a war tool, and that explains the migration of Irish people to the United States with the crisis of the potato, I think it's called, and the same techniques of hunger as a war tool are being used right now in Gaza. In 1948, the partition of Palestine took place. The United Nations approved the creation of the State of Israel and the creation of the State of Palestine, but the first one was created and not the second. Okay? This is a very important date because in 1948, the Nakba took place. The Nakba is the national tragedy for Palestinian people. 800,000 people were expelled from their houses. They listened to the different tortures that were having place in closed towns, so they ran away. Last week, the 9th of April, the anniversary of a very important manslaughter took place, which is the manslaughter of Deir Yassin, where around 100, 200 people, Palestinians, were assassinated by the state of Israel. But it's not about the number, but about the cruelty it was used there. Okay? The violence, the way they were killed, women, pregnant women, because there is this idea that when killing a pregnant woman, Palestinian woman, they kill two at once, right? And different terrible events that took place in this Deir Yassin massacre. Okay? People run away, they became refugees in different places, and the National Jewish Fund, which is like a fund in charge of property, economic issues, took the houses. Still today, Palestinian people remain with their keys, the keys of their houses, and that's why it's one of the symbols of the Palestinian resistance, because they still have their keys. Some families in the past tried to come back to knock at the door, and depending on the people who live there, they were received, and then they left, obviously, or they simply couldn't enter into their own houses. The National Jewish Fund and in general the State of Israel considered those properties as abandoned goods, as abandoned properties, okay? As the Palestinian people had left their houses because they wanted. Following this idea, this Orientalist idea that Arab people are like a mess, they don't take care of their things, they simply run away and don't worry about their own, yeah, the things they have. And that is, as I've said, an argument that is present along all the Zionist rhetorics, even in the vocabulary, as I've mentioned, considering those houses as abandoned houses instead of stolen houses or simply people who have run away. In this 1948 partition, there is also what is called, I don't know if this is the term in English, an urbicide. It is the destruction of urban areas, even eliminating the natural and the autochthonous trees. The trees that existed there are destroyed, and they brought European trees to replant the area. And they started building like recreative zones or parks above mass graves with where Palestinians had been buried. So this idea of transforming Gaza into a recreative area, that plans that we hear about today, Trump, for example, are not new. And sometimes we don't give importance to the words of Trump, or at least as during the first mandate, it was more the gesture than the action. We think that he will not do what he promises, but I think that the second mandate is different. But it has happened. It has already happened in the past to completely erase the way cities were built, the nature, the different aspects of the city, to transform that into kind of European style cities or towns. Part of this attempt to erase the memory of the place, and I will come back to that issue of memory side I mentioned yesterday, is the creation of a committee of Jewish names. The names of the streets, the names of the different towns were changed in 1948 to avoid keeping any trace of the Palestinian heritage. So many, well, the cities of 1948 that today are part of Israel, but which are Palestinian, have different names, and the streets as well. At the same time, Israeli politicians changed their names. They had European surnames, and they changed them, some letters, to make them sound more from the from the area, more I don't know how to say it. Yeah, more Middle Eastern, right? And there are many examples. There are many examples of Israeli politicians who change their names. If you take a look, you'll see a very long list. You'll be surprised because there are current names of people we know, prime ministers that have changed their names to seem more from this area. In 1948, the Declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was established. This plan of making these rights available for everyone, but this represents as well this double face we talked about yesterday, about bringing the best ideas and the best advantages on the part of the Western world, science, rights, universality. But in that same year, as I've said, the Nakba took place and the law of apartheid in South Africa was established. So as Ilan Pape said, there was a clear message to this role. We have this human rights declaration, but it doesn't work for you, not for Palestine or South Africa. In 1987, the first Intifada took place. Intifada is a popular uprising of people. The first time, let's say, that there is autosufficient and organized action against the occupation. It doesn't mean that they didn't show resistance before, but it's one big attempt of doing a unique action. That moment, Isaac Rabin was ruling Israel. I will talk about the Israeli left later on, because I think it's very interesting how that image has been sent to the world as some Israeli politicians who belong to leftist parties are, I don't know if we use that in English, but in Spain we say are the Colombs. All right, the Colombs, the Colombs, and the right-wing politicians are the halcons in English, halcones. Well, these falcons, exactly. Columns and falcons, right? My thesis is that sometimes it's worse to appear as a column when you are a falcon. At least falcons are falcons and appear as such, right? Isaac Rabin was a very popular Prime Minister of Israel. He was assassinated by extreme right-wing Israeli citizen, but he was also known as the name of a dinosaur, quebrantahuesos in Spanish. This dinosaur who breaks the bones. Why? Because he gave the order of breaking the bones of Palestinian young people who throw stones when they were alive. While being alive, they were broken their bones. And that was happening during the mandate of Isaac Rabin. Isaac Rabin continued the occupation and didn't try to end the occupation. So I think it's part of the critique to dismantle also the myths of the Israeli left that probably is not as leftist as it conceives itself. In 1991, the Peace Conference of Madrid took place, but Israel didn't accept that the Palestinian Authority could participate as its member. So it's a peace conference where one of the two parts can't be present. So the Palestinian delegation only had the option of going to that conference along with the Jordanian delegation. They came together because Israel didn't want the Palestinians to go alone when the goal was to discuss and to try to achieve some agreement. This is very important as well, because that reflects that the state of Israel, and you will see that I'm talking all the time about the state and the politics of Israel, not of the people. The state of Israel has not ever recognized an interlocutor in the Palestinian sector. The Palestinian Authority, which were at the moment who ruled or who tried to rule Palestine, is a progressive sector, moderated, kind of leftist, because it has different groups inside. And Israel didn't give them any power or any acknowledgement or any role, and didn't try to work at all with them. So when rejecting the moderate part of the Palestinian politicians, somehow they were embracing different groups that may be less moderate than the Palestinian Authority. The point is, if they don't want these political actors, then what is the option? They don't recognize anyone at all to talk or to achieve an agreement. As the Oslo agreements, which took place in 1993, didn't succeed, even if they brought some hopes. The occupation continued, and then in 2000, the second Intifada took place. This case, it wasn't with stones. The suicide attacks started, and the situation continued as unstable as before. And then in 2003, the nationality law, or the law of nationality in Israel, was established. And that means that more colons are accepted. Okay? Many towns, colon towns, are built in the West Bank, especially in the West Bank. The Arab stops being considered as one of the languages of the state, because we have to remember that there is a very important percentage of the Israeli population who are Arabs, okay? Israeli Arabs. Jerusalem is considered the capital of Israel, even if the United Nations doesn't accept so. The capital of Israel is Tel Aviv so far. And then in 2011, the Nakba law establishes that it is forbidden to talk about the Nakba in Israel in public institutions, that funds will be retrieved of universities that include a topic or that celebrates congresses on that. Another important factor I would like to mention is the fact that in this process of occupation, there's a process of transfer. It's called transfer politics, to try to avoid the unity of Palestinians. And that's why today, even the West Bank is a set of Bantustans of different points which can't be connected at all, which depend on different checkpoints, which makes any type of state or of political unity impossible. There is, well, I forgot to mention, excuse me, a very important war, which is the 1967 war, the 6 Days War, where more territory was occupied. And when the Naksa, instead of the Nakba, the Naksa took place. That means also the forced displacement of people, of 300,000 Palestinians that have to abandon their houses. Okay? It's very interesting that it is this moment in 1967, okay, this bigger occupation, that the United States entered into game. So far, they were reluctant, right? There are some proposals of African countries to solve the problem. It's also relevant to highlight this presence of the Global South, of African countries, especially South Africa, to make these proposals to break this, if not Orientalist, this in general Southeast idea that only Europe or only Western countries have political plans or scientific programs or initiatives. In this case, we see that Africa has always been present when dealing with the Palestinian occupation. And it is in 1967 when the Israeli left starts his critique. I mean, it's not, I don't mean in this year. I mean, in general, even today, their critique is against what happens starting in 1967, not in relation to what happened before. Okay? They say we are against the occupation that took place after the 6 Days War, but they don't include a critique to what happened in 1948 or even before the first occupation of colons. And that creates a problem, because that selection of as I said, milestones, of historic milestones or dates, as if before 1967 nothing had happened, makes the picture be smaller, and to understand that Palestinians are paying for the crimes or the guilt Europeans were responsible of. Palestinians were not responsible of the Second World War, of the trauma, of the genocide, of the Holocaust, but paid the bill of the of what these Western countries have done. In fact, they received the first migrants or refugees who were running away from Nazism. They were received at the beginning by Palestinians, and because they didn't expect like bad news, they taught them how to work the land, and then later on, and this is very well explained by Rashid Khalidi, a Palestinian author from Colombia, if I am right, whose grandfather or grand-grandfather was one of the first mayors of Jerusalem, and this relative exchanged letters with Herzl to measure the temperature and to see how things were going. And then when time passed, Palestinians felt that something was not going right, that they have welcomed these people, but that their plans were to stay and to acquire the land. Today, we talk about the Nakba, the Nakba in process or ongoing Nakba, which means that the Nakba has not finished yet. The Nakba is still happening and taking place. I don't have the updated numbers because it is impossible to keep the update of the number of Palestinians who are being murdered, sorry, but the numbers are terrifying. Around, well, I think I have them. Yes, I have them, sorry. I have the dates, in fact, of 25th of March, so kind of last month, so it will be bigger. And the numbers are around 50,000 people who have been murdered, around 20,000 people, according to other sources, 20,000 will be under the rubble without being recuperated, 113,000 wounded without receiving a proper treatment, 113,000. And if we take these 50,000 people who have been murdered, I insist that the number will be much bigger, because there are also like derivated deaths of people who are not receiving, I don't know, dialysis or insulin if they have diabetes, diseases related to some illnesses that were eradicated but are growing due to the conditions of water, food, etc. There are 15,000 kids who have been murdered. That is one every 45 minutes. A kid is murdered by the state of Israel. 8,300 more or less women. 3,800 of people. Sometimes we forget about them, and we should think about how difficult it is for them to walk, to move, or to get anything. And around 22,000 men. It is important sometimes to avoid this speech, and it is done with the best of intentions. I am aware of that, but it's part of an Orientalist view on things to distinguish women and kids. Half of them, or 70%, or whatever number, are women and kids, because that sends a message that Palestinian men deserve their fate or deserve their death. Part of this lack of humanization linked to Islam and Zionism is to build, to the same extent as the image of the Black man was built in the United States, and that Angela Davis denounced the myth of the Black man as terrible person, violent, with the worst of the characteristics, and she denounced that something similar may happen to Arab men or to Palestinian men, right? They are conceived, and in this way, the soft power that the United States has used has contributed to that through the movies, to the popular culture, the image of Arab men as terrorists, as animals, as violent people, may lead people to say, okay, women and kids, and as a feminist, I have to say that obviously they are in a situation of asymmetry, they are more vulnerable. It's important to remind that women are being done surgeries, cesareans without anesthesia, okay, and they don't have the conditions to deliver good. But also, Arab men shouldn't be in conditions to suffer this situation. It's part of the Zionist rhetoric to use the pinkwashing and also the greenwashing strategy. The pinkwashing strategy consists on appearing as a modern country, a supporter of the feminist issues and cause, using some platforms as Eurovision, etc., etc. Whereas the treatment they give to Palestinian women, not only in Gaza, but along these decades, avoiding them to go to the hospitals when they are going to deliver, or in general, the treatment both men, women, kids, all people receive, has nothing to do with feminism, but it's part of this commercial strategy to appear as a modern country, not this slogan of the only democracy in the Middle East being them, right? They may be a democracy for them, but it depends on the concept we have on democracy. If it's a short or narrow concept, only articulated as an voting exercise, it's not the only democracy, because most, if not all the countries in the Middle East, people vote. That democracy seems to be much more than that. In the case of Israel, it's not coherent to have an internal democracy and at the same time exercising the maximum violence outside. Not to talk about the fact that Israel has been considered as an apartheid state, even by the Israeli press, even by Haaretz, for example. They are aware of what they are. They apply different laws inside, so that dismantle also that myth of democracy. Our population receives a different law than the Israeli one. There are ratios of population. In Jerusalem, for example, there is a 70-30 ratio. So 70% of the population must be from Israel and 30% from Palestine, and some marriages, well, in fact, marriages with people from outside the West Bank are forbidden. They don't allow couples to join if one of them lives or is from outside, other country or other region. So along the number of victims, we count also on 257 journalists that have been killed, many health workers, doctors. I want to mention a very hurtful case of Dr. Abu Safiya. I don't know if you have heard about him. He was the director of a very important hospital, and he was abducted by the Israeli troops and sent to jail. His kid had been murdered some months ago as well, and then he appeared again some weeks ago, I think, with handcuffed and under signs of torture. He has been tortured, and there is a very big campaign, an international campaign, to demand his liberation. Not only his liberation, of course, but he represents how sanitary workers are being attacked for the only reasons that the goal is to destroy the infrastructures, all infrastructures, especially health infrastructures. There are hundreds of kids in jail. That's why I mentioned that being a democracy includes and entails like some weight, not only voting. Hundreds of kids in jail. Last week, one of them was liberated. He was jailed when he was probably 11 11, 12. And in jail, he developed schizophrenia and different mental issues. He was not allowed to embrace his mother, only to touch her finger. And he was liberated 10 years later with serious health issues, obviously. There are thousands of cases because Israel detains Palestinian people under what they called I don't remember the name, like extra judiciary detentions, administrative detentions. That means that they are kept, they are taken to jail without charges and without a lawyer. They don't know why they are charged. It could be because they have posted in Facebook, or because they have thrown a stone, or simply because they were there, right? So these hostages are part of the political solution from the part of Palestinian people. 600,000 kids are at risk of total paralysis if they don't receive, I think it's the polio vaccine. They don't get access to it. This population, 600,000 kids, are at risk of paralysis. The number of amputated is very high, both children and especially young people, because Gaza has a very, very young population. So that explains why the young age of the victims is as such. Some numbers mentioned that probably between 5 and 8% of the population of Gaza has disappeared, has been eliminated. And well, it may seem a small number, but 8% is a very big number of lethality. Think about the COVID, which had 1% of lethality, and it was dramatic. Here we're talking about between 5 and 8%. This situation of occupation is described, for example, by a very important lawyer, Palestinian lawyer, called Diana Butu, as being violent in every aspect. She says that every aspect of the occupation is violent. And that is reflected, as I mentioned, in, I called, but I have a text on that called The Biopolitics of the Israeli Occupation, how it affects all every daily task of life: health, education, social life. If we think about universities, for example, that it's a point I wanted to include. All the universities in Gaza have been destroyed. There's no single university which stands, right? And that's part of what we talked about yesterday. Yesterday we mentioned Iraq with the invasion of the United States, right? And this elimination of the academics. In the case of Palestine, Israel wants to destroy all the educational infrastructure because it is aware, the state of Israel is aware that one of the tools of the Palestinians is education. Before what happened along this year, the level of literacy was of 97%. 97% of Palestinian people were received education and knew how to read and write. That is a very high percentage in comparison to other countries, and in a situation of occupation, so it has even more merit. Why? Because Palestinians are very aware that their future depends on their education. This is not like a praise only for the fact that they are Palestinians, but because it's based on the facts that they have struggled to continue going to classes, to build schools in the refugee tents. And in the case of the previous events, already some decades ago, for example, during the exams of to enter university. I don't know the name, to have access to university. These exams you do along 2 or 3 days. The Israeli troops cut the checkpoints, so the students have to go through the mountains in donkeys or horses or however. Also, the fact of the existence of these checkpoints make the university life very precarious, because if the students need 3 hours to go, 3 hours to come back, they can't stay after class or have their friends or have their seminars or associations for leisure, for organization. And it's part of this attempt to avoid any unity, any social group that could lead into an action against the occupation or for their own pleasure. And still, Palestinian people continue and try to educate themselves. In Gaza, the situation, as I mentioned, is absolutely complicated, but still they go to school. There was the day to come back to school. Universities can't work. I've known some cases of students who still try to have their small classes or to study with their own books, but this is a generation that will suffer that lack of classes. Many students have been murdered, deans, tenure track professors, etc. This strategy against culture and education started in 1948. I've mentioned these abandoned properties, these houses, but it also happened with private libraries, Palestinian private libraries. This is explained by Rashid Khalidi, which were destroyed and whose books were taken to the Hebrew University under the classification of AP, abandoned property, with this idea that Palestinian people leave their books when running away of a massacre and don't carry them so they don't care about their books, blah, blah, blah. A very, also very relevant issue on this description of the treatment of the land, of the things that we talked about also yesterday, this view, this objectual view on how we manipulate the things that we consider of our property. It is described as epistemologically by Edward Said as a discipline of the detail or a detailed politics on the part of Israel. What does it mean? He explains how when the colons arrived, they started taking measure of everything. Okay? And he says, well, it is true that in this case, the Palestinians were very confident. For example, they hadn't registered their houses. It was like, it was enough to belong to the earth. It was enough to be at home, to have the right to be at home, right? And when the first Zionist groups arrived, they started taking measure of everything, taking note of every aspect. That's why he says detail a politics that took Palestinians by surprise, because as I've said, they had not institutionalized their own properties, and then that strategy of abandoning properties worked perfectly. I also wanted to add some information on the Jewish population coming from Arab countries. There was a very big population of Arab Jewishes. For example, in Iraq, it's one of the countries with more population. Around, well, in total, there were 650,000 Jewish in Arab countries, right? And when the events of colonization started having place, the secret Israeli services, okay, according to the bibliography I have used, carried out attacks of false flag, in Spanish, false attacks against these communities to make fear grow. Okay? They have lived for centuries together among Christian, Muslim in these Arab countries, and when the Israeli secret services produced these attacks in the name of Arabs, these Jewish started experiencing a lot of fear that created tension, and they finally went to Israel. These Jewish Arabs spoke Arabic and had Arabic traditions, but it is astonishing how the Zionist policies made them forget and erase their past. Today, they are one of the most one of the strongest groups in support of the Israeli policies, of the right-wing Israeli policies, because they have been encouraged and they have been educated to forget their language, to forget their traditions, and to eliminate that Arab part they have, and to insist more in the part that they don't belong to that. And I think it's part of this memory site to avoid these Jewish Arab populations, to keep part of their own heritage. Memoricide is a term used by Nur Masalha, who is a theorist, Palestinian theorist, and it's also used by Ilan Pappé, this Israeli historian I'm mentioning all the time. How does the memoricide work? It consists on eliminating any link or any bond of the Palestinian people to their land, even to admit that they exist, as I have said, to avoid admitting that they are going through any suffering, to eliminate that Palestinian history of the land through the change of names, as I said, of streets, of families. And a very important part, through the elimination of the attempt of eliminating Palestinian culture. And I will arrive to that because it's part of the analysis I want to do on the survival aspect. Ilan Pappé has a very important text I recommend to you, which talks about the context and the shocking and dramatic events also of the 7th of October, when 100 to 200 Israeli people in this kibbutzim were killed. Ilan Pappé explains that, and this is part of what we could explain as the phenomenology of the victim. There are different ways to experience being a Palestinian refugee, and this is also a conversation we have had many times. It's not the same to be a Palestinian who lives in the West Bank and who, even through violence, is able to keep some part of his or her homeland. It's not the same to be a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, and it's not the same to be a Palestinian refugee in Gaza. And that is what Ilan Pappé explains. He says in this, it was like a conference and then transcript in the press, written, I think, in November 2023. He says that people in Gaza have very present their history of exile. First, because Gaza was not an area destined to live. Gaza is a place of refugees who had been expelled. And these people in Gaza, especially those who are in the border, were expelled from what today are the attacked kibbutzim. According to Ilan Pappé, 11 towns that appear in archive number 40 of the 25th of November of 1948 through a policy of expulsion, burn, and demolish of the Palestinian houses. So these people in Gaza, who are in the border, are observing, according to Lampape, every day the houses or the land where the houses of their grandparents were. Okay, and it's important to keep that detail of the number of the archive of these 11 towns that were burned and destroyed, and where the kibbutzim were built after that. And they are seeing that every day, and they are suffering every day that occupation. And it's interesting how he explains it. The archive issue is very important, because archives are memories. This is very well explained by Reinhard Koselleck. The archives are not only old libraries with dust and ancient books, but they keep the heritage, the past, and this memory. And part of the Zionist strategies consists on eliminating, and even there was a campaign to enter the archive of the National Authority of Palestine in a town in Lebanon, to take the papers and the documents where the idea of nation, of the Palestinian nation, was explained. Look how we start linking this with what we said yesterday. The Israeli army needs to enter an archive to take the documents where there is a clear statement of Palestinian nationalism. If we follow this speech of nation and pan-Arabism I talked about yesterday, we see the same scheme in the case of the Palestinian people. There is a moment of pan-Arabism, and after Sykes-Picot, a growing local nationalism. And Palestinian people started very soon, I would say at the end of the 19th century and starting the 20th century, considering themselves as a nation, referring and auto-referring themselves as Palestinians, also as Arabs, overlapping identities, but with their specificity as Palestinians. And if we compare this to that attempt of dehumanizing, not only dehumanizing, we should distinguish two steps. First, the state of Israel, I repeat, tried to deny the existence of Palestinians. Some of them still do it. They say that Palestinians don't exist. There is no such thing as Palestinians. But when it seems that it's obvious that when people are being murdered, there's someone there, they dehumanize them. And then the rhetoric of they are terrorists, they are animals. They talked about Palestinians as cockroaches, as animals, making them deservers of their death. As Palestinians, that's the Zionist rhetoric, deserve what they are going through. Given this situation, and before we make a break, I would like to throw a number that can allow me to continue after the break, which is that around 1,500, if not more, families in Gaza have totally disappeared. All of your members, and we're talking about very big families usually, have been completely assassinated. I mean, no one remains. How can we transform these people who are obviously victims? How can we transform them into survivors, given the fact that they have not survived at all, and there is no way that these families can continue through any other relative? How can we transform victims into survivors? Is the question I throw, and that I will try to answer after the break, if you agree.
Grazie.
Thank you. We'll be back in 20 minutes or 15 minutes.
Che è necessario per...
Okay, 20 minutes, let's say. Thank you. Hello again. I had thrown a question before the break about these around 1,500 families who have been completely eliminated, and how this can make us reflect about the status of the victim. Because to think or to pose the issue of survivors, there is a first necessary step, which is to do some analysis on the victim, to acknowledge that victims are victims. This concept is very linked to the idea of the suffering that a victimizer exercises. Okay, so we have a relationship of dependency and passivity, okay, on the one hand, to make it possible, the thinking that these victims can be survivors and later on can have a geopolitical role. This is only possible if we don't forget the passive and the active aspect, the emancipatory aspect, the communitary aspect of these victims that usually the realpolitik analysis forget. They take populations as numbers to do analysis, as oppress individuals, but when forgetting that potentiality, some lack of humanization is also playing in the rhetoric. I am aware that it's very complicated to see the potential of survivor in these situations, of nuda vida, to follow the expression of Agamben, of bodies that write their names as children and adults in Palestine do. They write their names on their bodies, so in case they are murdered, they are not forgotten and that they are recognized, right? It's complicated to see that potentiality of survival in these bodies, in these lives that suffer the lack of food and water. In fact, not all the victims survive. I mentioned that, but this doesn't mean that even those who didn't survive are not part of the collective speech of survival. There is this paradox. They can survive despite the fact that they are victims. But the paradox, the even bigger paradox here, is not this one that I will build later on, but the one of the colonial speech that not only doesn't recognize that natives are victims, right? That are survivors, but they don't even recognize that they are victims because they deny their existence, as I've said before. Their character as human beings is put into question, but first they are denied as human beings. I have a quote here. I think it was Golda Meir. Sometimes she's celebrated as being a politician, a female politician, but we know that not everything depends on that, but on the actions. She denied the existence of Palestinians. There's no such thing as Palestinians, she affirmed, right? Another prime minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, one of the persons who changed his name from Grün to Ben-Gurion, said that all people will die and young generations will forget, in the case of the Palestinian people. He was expressing that status quo politics, that lack of humanization of the Israeli policies, but he forgot that precisely what Palestinians do is to remember all the time their history, their heritage, their culture, their language, and their own political role. They don't forget, and above all, what they do is to use memory as a tool of resistance. And this memory doesn't talk only about political events or historical circumstances, but it talks about importance, as I've said, of culture, poetry, education, art, artisan work, etc. But I will be there in a moment. I will come back to the issue of that rejection of the existence of Palestinians, and the second step, which is to treat them as if they were not humans, because this is a very important argument in the action that South Africa has brought to the International Court accusing Israel of committing genocide. There are several points to admit that there is an ongoing genocide. I'm not going to enter into the legal discussion, but a real desire of eliminating people or to move them, this to forcibly transfer them. It's not necessary to actually kill all the members, but to express that desire to move entire populations, to incorporate this lack of humanization, to avoid the births of these people. And we could say that all these points are being applied in Palestine, especially because the Israeli governors, the Israeli politicians have expressed openly what they want to do, the fact that they want to erase Gaza, or that they want to build a leisure park there. I insist on the economic aspect. The real estate companies are already selling pieces of land. They're selling apartments with nice views in front of the beach in Gaza. And these are being sold, for example, in New York and in other cities of the United States. So there is this component of accumulation of the capital to to transform or to get that land as a product, as an object. That's why I insisted so much yesterday, as something to be manipulated, to be sold, to get profit from, plus value, etc., etc. So they are openly admitting what they are doing, official statements on their desire to eliminate population, to consider them as animals. And I would like to mention these viral videos that are present in the internet, produced by Israeli soldiers committing all kind of atrocities, destroying religious buildings, destroying houses, getting into the babies' beds. I don't know why. Taking women's private clothes and putting them in the own soldiers' bodies. There is a viral trend and viral joke that young Israelis do, which is to call their grandparents or their parents without saying that they are their grandsons, and they pretend they call in the name of an NGO, and they say, we are raising money, we are raising funds for the children in Gaza because they are starving, poor children. And the grandparents on the line get completely angry and mad. What are you saying to me? I don't want to talk anymore. And they hang the telephone, and these teenagers laughed and made all the jokes because they are cheating on their families. And this is hard because that reflects what I said about all these decades of dehumanization, of animalization of the other as being inferior, There are also videos of soldiers dressed as Arabs, mocking of them, making fun of them as if they were dirty, ugly, or when they bomb a building, they make a coincidence with a sound or with a song, all kind of atrocities that reflect that the state, not only the army itself, but in general, the feeling, the social feeling in the state of Israel is completely influenced by this dehumanization of the Arabs and of Palestinians. That, as I insisted, it ends or it begins in even in cultural products, movies, Hollywood, the enemy being always the Arab. If in the past it was the Russian guy, today's the Arab, or both. I don't know anymore if they are playing both, but the Arab is always considered as the terrorist, as the animal, as inferior. And that is part of this dehumanization. Sometimes this lack of humanization is non-voluntary, and it's given by numbers itself, because 3 victims can move us. That 3,000, it's a number we can't understand. 30,000, 300,000, we can't be in charge, phenomenologically speaking, of this magnitude, right? 10,000 widows, for example, 10 kids who are amputated every day, more atomic bombs, I mean, more explosives than in the atomic bombs of Hiroshima. And meanwhile, an Israeli minister saying that the north of Gaza is more beautiful than ever. A letter of 100 Israeli doctors insisting that on the fact that hospitals in Gaza should be bombed. Okay? A letter of 100 doctors. There are some tours in ships, cruises of colons that travel to see as a touristic attraction the bombs, how the bombs are thrown in Gaza, and they take that as a touristic trip. So sometimes it's impossible to bear that amount of violence, but there is a victimizer that commits these atrocities in a frame of a narrative that works especially well in the United States, where some politicians are asked if they consider that Palestinians, or whether Palestinians are human or not, and they don't answer to that simple question, which is not even a political question, right? Because it has played, this rhetoric has played along many years. And this has been promoted by Zionism as a movement defined by Edward Said as a practical system of accumulation, I'm reading the quote, of power, lands, ideological legitimacy, and displacement of people, of other ideas, and of previous legitimacies. And I think it's very interesting to read this definition, because it doesn't put the focus only on the land, which is essential. We're talking about an illegal occupation according to the United Nations, but also about ideas, legitimacy, ideologies, and displacement of other ideas. Very similar to what we explained yesterday on how these specific systems of decision that existed in the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon with this group of 7 people was changed or was transformed into a more Western way of doing politics. According to Edward Said, the epistemological triumph of Zionism is precisely to have made people think in general that Arabs didn't exist in Palestine, right? In 1948, for example. Many people think that they didn't exist. Ilan Pappé calls this disinformation plans. So it's a very well-studied ideology, Zionism. I mean, it's a theory that studies a lot the object of a study, to the extent that in the past, most of Arabists were Israeli members of the army. I mean, the most experts on Palestine, on Oriental issues, were Israeli members of the army. And that is explained by Khalidi. He said they spied and at the same time they oppressed the object of a study they took. They were experts, but they took that as an object of study instead of as a people of study or individuals of study. If we had to choose a moment where instead of rejecting their existence, they are admitted as existent, but as non-humans, is with the creation of the Organization for the Liberation of Palestine, because it's more difficult to deny that they exist, but they are not legitimized, as I've said before, as interlocutors. I already explained how the biggest success of the Hasbara, which is the propaganda system of Israel, is to make anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism be synonyms. We have said that Palestinians are also Semitics and that the critique to Zionism does not involve at all to criticize the Jewish religion. There are many, many thousands of American Jewish who have been protesting against the genocide, and Palestinians don't reject Israelis because of their Jewish religion or ethnicity, but because they are occupying forces. If they had another religion, it would be the same. And this is important because we have said that sometimes this is explained as if it was a religious issue, and it's not, even if religion has an important role. And in fact, the references of the right-wing, the Israeli right-wing, are related to Amalek and the day when, according to them, Palestinians should be eliminated. They are the ones who used these religious references, but Orientalism has made people think that the radical and the ones who think in these terms are the Arabs, whereas the Palestinians are both Christian and Muslim, and they are much more political in terms of their demands. So it's not a religious problem, it's a political problem with a factor, which of course is religion. There are some authors, for example, Finkelstein, another anti-Zionist Jewish author, or Mohammed El-Kind, a Palestinian theorist, who support the right of oppressed people to get angry. And this is interesting because Palestinians are asked to be perfect victims. They have to behave correctly all the time. They can't make mistakes. And these two authors defend the right of these oppressed people not to forgive. I think it's philosophically, it's interesting. And I think that humanization admits that individuals have the right to all the spectrum of feelings, not to ask all the time to be perfect or to forgive, especially when the situation does not allow to do that. But Palestinians are told to be perfect victims, not to shout, not to insist, morally excellent without mistakes, and that is part also of the humanization process. Part of the humanization is to, or consists on, erasing the differences of this plural society. As I said, they mentioned that, or the fact that there are Muslim and there are Christian Palestinians who suffer occupation exactly in the same way, or, for example, the active role of Palestinian women, to which I would like to dedicate some minutes. Again, Orientalism has made people think that Arab women are oppressed. I'm not going to deny the existence of patriarchy everywhere, okay? Also in the Arab world, but everywhere. But Arab women have also their role, and especially Palestinian women have worked a lot on defending their freedom. I would like to name some important characters, because part of the recuperation of the memory and of this action of making victims appear as survivors is to remember these important people who have contributed to the liberation and the freedom of Palestine. I would like to name Khalida Jarrar. Khalida Jarrar belonged to the Popular Front of Liberation of Palestine, like the communist or the most leftist part of the Palestinian resistance. She was detained for the first time the 8th of March of some decades ago, when she was participating in a march for women. She was in jail, and she was not allowed to go out of jail to say goodbye to her daughter, who have died from a heart attack. The daughter was, I don't know, if 20 something years old. She died very young, and she couldn't give her farewell to her own daughter. Last year she was kidnapped again. She was in jail, and she was liberated, I think, like 1 month ago, in terrible physical conditions. Then she appeared again, more recovered, but we could see her suffering, and these moving images of how she was received by her husband. There are some, and this due to a positive aspect of social media. Has many negative points, but somehow social media is contributing to give a human vision on Palestinians that probably some people didn't have. There has been a process of learning, of getting knowledge by people who may not be interested at all before, but that now are learning Arabic, are learning Arabic dance, and are getting to know the history of these people. And they are surprised to know that Palestinian women could be university professors, or that even something as normal or obvious as that the fact that grandparents could play with their kids. There is a famous man whose name I don't remember right now, whose granddaughter was murdered, and he said, "The soul of my soul. She was the soul of my soul." Nahban, it's called, and he was, and I say he was because he was murdered some months ago. He wore a long beard, the traditional dress, a turban, and it's the classic image that some people would relate to well, the classic Orientalist character that people don't like, and people were surprised that that this man was so sad and so moved because his granddaughter had died, and dedicated phrases to her, and that sentence, "the soul of my soul," has become like a leitmotif in graffitis, in poetry, and as a reflect that we shouldn't fear this type of people, that some people don't wear beards or don't wear Arabic dresses, and still it can be dangerous, and much more than people who are innocent but simply belong to another tradition. The way people are freed from jail, from Israeli prisons, is dramatic. They have gone through systematic tortures, lack of medicaments, of food. Some of them are forbidden the use of social networks and the use of graduated classes in jail. So they can't read, they can't continue educating themselves. And I say this because this Khalida Jarrar, this leftist woman, taught other women in jail some studies or English to continue that process of education. Other names, for example, Hiba Abu Nada was a poet who was murdered as well. She wrote a very sad poem about how she knew she would die and how she was listening to the bombs. Ahed Tamimi, she's alive, is a symbol of the resistance. She belongs to an activist family in a town that is constantly threatened by colons. And she was jailed when she was 17 years old because she slapped a soldier in the face, right? She was taken again last year and then she was freed. I'm not sure about her father. He was taken as well, but I'm not sure if he has been liberated or not. She became a symbol because she broke with stereotypes, the physical stereotypes of the Palestinian woman. She's blonde with blue eyes. In fact, her mom says she's famous because of that. If she had been with black eyes and black hair, maybe not, but she applies with the stereotypes that triumphed in Europe, and still she's one of the symbols of the resistance. Also Fatwa Tukan, she's not alive anymore, but she was a poet, a communist poet, if I remember well, and many other names that I could bring, but I just wanted to throw these names because it's important to coin and to fix the thought, the general thought into particular examples. I have mentioned also some men as the doctor and many others. I will skip some parts. Yeah. These metaphors or these images of animalization, of dehumanization, can be well observed into an anecdote that I have always considered like unbelievable. That explains Edward Said in a video you can find. There is this meeting of a television that was going to interview Edward Said and Benjamin Netanyahu, who at the moment was ambassador of Israel in the United Nations. But Benjamin Netanyahu didn't want to sit in the same room as Edward Said, not even in the same building. So the journalist, interviewer, said to Said, well, you both didn't want to sit and talk, replicating this speech of equidistancy, that both sides are terrible, both sides do the same. And Said interrupted the interviewer and said, no, I wanted, I didn't mind sitting in the same room. He was the one who refused. So when the interviewer, I guess in another building, comments this to Netanyahu, he answered, yeah, that is because Edward Said wanted to kill me. And the presenter only came up with the idea of giving credit to that and answer, oh, really? Then tell us, how is that possible? So following that line of admitting or accepting that Palestinians are animals and murderers, Edward Said, who is like a very a classic thinker without any suspicion of anything else. I'm thinking also about this anecdote or situation which Rafif Siare went through. Rafif Siare is a woman, a Palestinian journalist and poet that I had the opportunity to meet. There are many videos that you can watch because she makes poetry like slam poetry, like rap. It's very interesting. She has never gone to Palestine. She cannot. And she was told by a colleague, a journalist, don't you think that everything will end if you stop teaching your kids how to hate? So she wrote a poem that you can find her reciting her own poem called We Teach Life, Sir. And the poem says, I learned all the resolutions of the UN concerning my own situation. I learned English. I adapted to everything. And the conclusion is that we still suffer, but we teach life, sir. These Palestinians, and I insist, this is not a praise out of anywhere, but it's how they understand resistance. It's based on teaching life, not hate, but on teaching survival. And that has political effects. Because when we deny moral agency or even epistemological agency, when we conceive that individuals or people are not rational because they are not human, or because they are inferior, or because they are not as us, then we deny that they have the power to carry out political activities. And that makes easier to think that, okay, Palestinians or Arabs are more linked to violence than other people. And that makes us forget that there have been many attempts to carry out peaceful options or peaceful activities to get freedom. In Gaza in 2019, and I think probably also in 18, but for 3 years, there were some peaceful protests called Great March of Return, where hundreds of people who participated in these marches were assassinated, and thousands of them wounded with shots, mostly on the legs. I insist, there is a politic of amputation that is present since Isaac Rabin, who gave those orders, until today, where soldiers shot to the parts of the body that can produce amputations. Sometimes this lack of humanization is done through charity. Some months ago, there were very big campaigns to throw food to Palestinians. They built a port so an NGO could bring in a ship, an NGO which announced with very big panels the name of the NGO, disobeying this biblical sentence that I have here. Matthew 6 says, be careful of not practicing your justice in front of men, so you are seen by them, or on the contrary, you wouldn't receive the prize of God. So when you give, that your left hand doesn't know what your right hand does. That means if you do charity, it's not necessary to announce that you are doing that. That instead, a very big show was made, a very big port was built. So now this touristic area that Trump wants has its own port. No need to build a port. Along with the throwing of boxes that sometimes killed the people who were expecting that help. That if you see the unboxing, because there are unboxing videos of that help, consisted on very few things, no real food, and not real help. Having said this, I would like to give the next step. And the next step, give me a second, is to conceive Palestinian people not only as victims, I have already gone through that, but as survivors. Edward Said said that if there is so much insistence on eliminating Palestinians, he says, not because they are not simply like annoying, that a population with an indestructible bond with the end. They show this reaffirmation of the roots towards the land, towards their own culture, and that makes us think of a concept, of a category. I've been doing some research, which is sumud. Sumud is a concept that doesn't have a very specific translation. Some people say it is resilience, but resilience may have neoliberal component of overcoming difficulties as an advantage, and it doesn't have that that sense. Sumud is resistance through many different activities of, as I've said, reaffirmation of life and of survival through the conditions of the occupation. Sorry. This includes the need to keep the communitary links, which are essential for Arab societies, the importance of the community. To be able to deal with trauma, to be patient in the checkpoints, to smile when you are detained. This is something that can be observed, I think, even in the United States. Or to keep in front of your house when your house has been demolished, or to stay firm when you are obliged to get naked in front of the soldiers. This idea of coming back home or staying at home once it's destroyed can be observed with all these people from Gaza that have come back during the fake truce, but that came back even knowing that probably they will be destroyed again, that they keep their lives, they take their breakfast there, they continue studying there, they organize their weddings, they do all the activities they would do in a normal situation. The issue of laughing, I usually link it to a political attitude. According to Bergson, laughing is a social act that is more related to the intellect than to the feelings, because it's a rational act. And that implies that it has a political side, because when we laugh, we affirm our presence and our existence, which is important, as we have mentioned. Judith Butler has also mentioned that laughing under occupation transforms resistance into a vivid issue by the living and in the name of the living humans that are there. And she said, I saw many examples of Sumud when she was there. And she said, it seemed evident to me that laughing was a way of life very linked to drugs, very linked to the fact of crying, laughing and crying at the same level, because it is a way of destroying the legitimacy of the violence of the victimizer. This is also, this gesture was made also by Khalida Jarrar, this activist I told you. When she was asked, what is Sumud? She laughed and she said, the word we relate with survival until we are free. Okay, so laughing is a political act related to freedom. There are authors who have studied this concept of Sumud, for example, Richke and Van Teffelen, and they insist that they are very inclusive actions. Sumud includes both men and women. They include people who are not or who don't have a Palestinian origin. There is another image that became an icon of this Sumud, a Palestinian prisoner who has been completely naked on a chair, and he has an Israeli soldier in front of him, and despite this humiliation, he stands with the face up with dignity. He's an example of Sumud. He was later on released. He was interviewed. So I insist on the fact that social media is playing a very important role also on spreading fake news and Zionist rhetorics, but despite the censorship that the social networks themselves are exercising against the post in favor of Palestine, they are achieving that people get access to these particular stories that, to my mind, are not anecdotes, but create a bond between people who don't know each other, but that make possible that we know the names, we know the histories, the stories, sorry, of these people, what happened to them, and that creates, even if online, an online community that can be important in terms of political international activism. Another important part of this Sumud inhabits in the strength of cultural symbols. It's a kind of soft power, but in this case, produced by victims and survivors. And this is being so successful that even Israel is doing some kind of cultural appropriation of these symbols. For example, with the food, okay, the traditional Palestinian food is Arab food, but that sometimes is sold or is shown as Israeli gastronomy, and it's not about keeping things. Of course, there is a common root, but the goal is to deny, for part of Zionist strategies, to deny that that is Palestinian food, because there will be no such Palestinian culture. The music, or for example, the tatris, or tatris is this cross point clothes or artisan work. This is the traditional artisan product of Palestinian women. It's an ancient tradition that made women invent their own language, or like a code, introducing some letters into the syllabs to tell their husbands or their relatives who were fighting in the mountains against the British troops that the British troops were coming. So women working together, creating community and inventing a language while producing this type of products. This can be present in dresses or in different clothes. And it's important because each flower, I don't know exactly this one, but the flowers, the trees, the birds are motifs related to the land and to the specific characteristics of each Palestinian city. Each Palestinian city has its own broderie, depending on the typical fruit or the typical bird or the typical flower. We can see that these motifs, this also Palestinian scarf from Jerusalem, are linked to the flowers, the trees, so all the natural components of the land, because that is the link and the attachment. One of the punishments, collective punishments that Israeli troops commit is destroying the olive trees. The olive tree is the symbol, the national tree of Palestine. The number of olive trees which are destroyed each year is enormous. And that means a lot for Palestinians, because these are the trees of their grandparents. But for the colon, that doesn't mean, for a colon, doesn't mean anything, because they don't have that link with these trees. The watermelon is also a symbol because it includes the colors of the flag. And the flag is forbidden. And it's forbidden even today. When the journalist Shirin Abu Akleh, a very famous female journalist, was murdered like 2 or 3 years ago while doing her job, her burial was attacked, the coffin was attacked, and the Palestinian flags were removed from the place where the family was. And she represents also a symbol of unity, because she was a female Christian Palestinian journalist who was the face for decades as presenter of television. And when she was killed, thousands of people in different cities of Palestine went out without any regard to differences, and that created a very big feeling of unity. So this artisan work, or the Palestinian scarf, the kufiye, which represents the paths and the lines it has on the sides, along with the internal part, which represents the nets of the fishermen whose boats have been bombed as well, to avoid any type of economy there, and also with the olive trees present in this scarf. All these are symbols that don't only generate community, but also they generate vitality. And a colonizer and this is explained by Professor Nicholas Rowe, colonizer doesn't want vitality, doesn't want happiness or energy in the victim. The colonizer wants the victim to be quiet, to be depressed, to be traumatized. And victims are traumatized, evidently, and we'll have to study the effects especially in children, of the fact of having lost their parents. There are many kids which are being taken care of by their own siblings of 10 years old, taking care of a baby, and children who don't have any family and who are alone in the world, that create a very big trauma. But at the same time, there is a very big strength in Palestinian people to continue having this vitality. I have forgot to mention the national or the traditional dance, which is the dabke. The dabke is a traditional dance of all the countries which conform the Great Syria before the division into different countries. The Great Syria, Bilad al-Sham, was Syria and Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. They were the same entity. Yeah. And then it was divided, and it generated different identities. That is true. But this common dance they share is called dabke, and depending on each state, it acquires different forms. The meaning of dabke is to stomp the feet, and it's very similar to other native people dances around the world. And it represents this attachment to the floor, to stomp the feet on the floor, on the land. What else? Yeah, I would like to take that third step, talking about geopolitics, which is the most political aspect. What Palestinians want, in different ways, because there are many different options, but in general, what they want is a state. And that is linked to that epistemological, rational, political agency that, depending on the fact that we give it to them or not, it will make sense or not. Obviously, if people think about Palestinian people as irrational beings, it will make no sense for them that they have a state. But we have said that they deserve that consideration, rational consideration, both epistemologically and politically. According to Edward Said, the main points of the Palestinian identity are based today in the need of recuperating the land and to materialize the Palestinian state. There are many plans to avoid that, many crazy ideas, to the same extent that when there was this hunger issue provoked by Israel some months ago, that could be solved opening the 7 roads that have access to Gaza. They invented different plans through ships, throwing the food, when the easiest solution was simply to open the roads. When we talk about politics, a similar issue happens. Political imagination becomes crazy with different plans, instead of choosing, like the Occam knife, the easiest option, which is to implement a Palestinian state. Zionism has always tried to eliminate this legitimization of the most political aspect of Palestine. Edward Said remembers the words of a military Arabist, Israeli, who said, it doesn't mean that there are no excellent characteristics among Arabs, but these don't constitute a base for a political program. They don't accept that they can do politics. But the Palestinian nationalism existed and exists basically because before 1948, there was a very important society. It was a Levantine society with airport, with ports, with a very big number. I'm not sure if I have it here. The number of newspapers and magazines which were published in these decades. There was a very emerging society, flourishing society, that try to build their own idea of nation, and it's Rashid Khalidi who explains that, not as an irrational opposition and fanatic opposition against Jewish autodetermination. It's not like a reaction, but as as its own idea of nation and autonomy, as a project of a country, along with their own idea or identity as Arabs. If you go to the webpage of the Foreign Affairs of Israel, you can find that they say, at the end of the 19th century, Arab nationalism didn't exist at all. Well, it's very easy to go to the sources and to find, as I explained yesterday, all the details. And the Arab population of Palestine was scarce, was little, and apolitical at the end of the 19th century. Ilan Pape, on the contrary, affirms that there were not only socio-political structures that they were, but also a very big economic activity, cultural activity, very big theoretical movement who elaborated this idea of nation, especially at the end of the 19th century, which is the moment where nationalism thinks a lot about the different ways it has to fulfill itself. And this, yeah, I have here the number. The number of new newspapers and magazines between 1908 and 1914 was 32 new newspapers. So it was a very active society. This political character of the Palestinian people is also well defined in the Thawabit, or main principles or red lines, formulated by the OPL, the Organization for the Liberation of Palestine, which is the right to resistance, the right to state autodetermination, Jerusalem as capital, and the right to return of the refugees, according to the resolution 194 of the Assembly of the United Nations. So they have very clear that we could analyze them or discuss them, but these are the principles, the political ideas and principles they have. So just to finish and to give space for the debate or to the questions, how can we come back to the first question I made after the break, which is, can survivors have a geopolitical role given their situation? My answer, my point of view is that they can, making bigger the definition of politics, making it bigger, overcoming the frame of realpolitik, because if we only measure politics in terms of influence or interest of power, obviously there is no place for the victims or for Palestinian victims, right? But if we consider that politics is much more than that, that is the cultural aspect, all the initiatives, all the attempts to survive every day, if that is politics, the generation of community, how they take care, for example, of animals when they are starving, people, and still have time to feed their animals, to do nice activities, to write, to educate themselves. That can be part of politics as well. Something not similar, but in parallel, happened in relationship with this global awareness during the 2003 marches against the invasion of Iraq, to link it with what I said yesterday, which made what Michael Rothberg called an individual implied with politics, which is a middle position between those who are not victims, but who are not either victimizers. It's the position of people as us who are observing what is happening, who are taking the risk of suffering the brutal censorship that may exist in relation to this issue, but that it's essential to think about political solidarity, according to this author. In the protest of 2003 against the illegal invasion of Iraq, we didn't count on the voice of the victims, okay? In part due to the lack of social networks. Now there is a big change due to this advance of the internet. We know the victims, we know their names, we know what they do, we give them voice, they have their voice. And as I said before, people who were not interested in the history of Palestine are now the biggest fans and the ones who are learning more about that. They discover a new word, but the difference is that this new word is discovered from the natives. The native people are the ones who are producing that discovery to Western people. So I guess that the best tribute to these victims and survivors of this 21st century is to contextualize, to learn, to avoid that memoricide, not to accept the trap of being exhausted. Someone, Francesca Albanese, this relator of the United Nations, said that we shouldn't have the the right or the privilege to be sad or to be exhausted, because meantime in Palestine people don't have time or don't have the opportunity to choose to be sad, and on the contrary they are struggling and putting all the efforts and their energies to survive and to become active part of the solution and of the freedom that Palestine needs in the form of a state. Thank you very much.
Io, prima che si facciano le domande, voglio dire solo una cosa: il nostro piccolo contributo a questa resistenza sarà quello di invitare la professoressa ogni anno a rifare questa lezione, perché è una lezione importantissima e che porta a un contributo fondamentale.
Grazie.
Grazie.
Grazie Vittorio per l'invitazione and for giving me this opportunity to explain, because it's not easy. I know, especially in other countries, not in Spain or Italy, but other countries, complicated to explain. And this is a very big opportunity to simply to talk, which is part of the solution and of political activism. So thank you. Online, you can do questions as well.
Sì, comunque registriamo. Il problema è che è quasi Pasqua. Perché adesso sì, la pausa. Loro finiamo. Sì, c'è quello. Io sono
I know, because maybe it seems stupid, but I wanted to know about, maybe you talk about the Palestinians that are in Israeli city at some point, and how did they recognize who is Israeli in base of what? I mean, you gave the citizenship of Israeli, and in base of what you consider it Palestinian, because Palestinian is a state that does not exist at the moment. So how do they make the difference? I mean, what gives you the permission to be Israeli, and what gives you what gives you not the permission to be Palestinian? I didn't understand that point. It's just that maybe you explained it, but
Thank you. It's a very interesting question. Well, in fact, any person in the world who proves that it has a Jewish origin, and I guess, and I think it's given through maternal line, okay, that heritage, can live in Israel. Okay, and many countries who have gone through economic crisis, for example, in South America or even in Europe, the citizens of a Jewish origin, without knowing the language or having had any link before or having it, we don't know, it depends on the case, they have been given the nationality, they have been given a house, language courses, right? On the other hand, those Palestinians who have the Israeli nationality are the ones who are in these cities that were occupied in 1948 and who remained, the few who remained.
The ones that were before the occupation, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
Before the occupation, of 1948, the ones who didn't escape from the massacres and which stayed there are Arab Israelis, and they speak both Arabic and Jewish, but they are second-class citizens. They don't receive the same law. That's why it's called an apartheid, because they can't participate in the same process as them. They pay the same taxes, but the garbage is not recollected in the same way. And then there's this disparity of how Palestinian refugees can't come back. People in Palestine who are under occupation can live well, but any Jewish citizen or any Jewish person in the world can become a citizen. I haven't mentioned, and I promise it, I will say a line on the Israeli left, because there is this myth as well of the columns I mentioned. And now, today, some voices of politicians belonging to the Laborist Party, which is like the Socialist Party, are criticizing Netanyahu for the politics. In fact, they contributed to the occupation, probably as much as the right-wing parties.
The faith column you were talking before.
The columns against the Falcons. The columns is this group of leftist or socialist political parties from Israel, which have this appearance of being more cooperative or less violent, who criticized what Netanyahu is doing, but who have contributed to the occupation. And they have, even in the most chimeric way. And this is why I wanted to talk about the kibbutzim. And the kibbutzim are an experiment, a socialist experiment that attracted many people from Europe in the past, probably with their best intentions. It's like a cooperative way to share, to avoid paying a rent, to get the products of the earth, to share them, to live in community, right? That's very nice as an idea, but the point is that first it reproduces this slogan of we have built, according to Zionists, we have built an oasis in the middle of the desert, when Palestinians already knew how to cultivate their lands. These kibbutzim were built on occupied lands. They were built with working class from Arab working class, or maximum by Oriental Jewish, Oriental Israelis, because you know that there are the Ashkenazis, the European origin Jewish, and the Oriental Jewish, Sephardic or Arab, right? And they suffer also some racism. So they were built on occupied lands. They were made with Arab hands, but Arabs were not allowed to enter, to participate. So it's like a socialist experiment, which is not socialist at all, or if it is, it has that red line, which at the end is racism and the consideration of native people as inferior or not existent. The Israeli left has always shown a very nice face, trying to show that they have conducted different peace plans. And if we go to the details, we find that they have promoted the occupation, that they have contributed to the construction of the wall, which I didn't mention, but that separates the Palestinian lands and retrieves the natural resources. And it has been translated into nothing, because they have not made a real critique of the occupation. They focus on the internal critique. In fact, Netanyahu has many internal trials of corruption, of crisis, and unfortunately the demonstrations of people, with the exception, I have to say, of the leader of the Communist Party, Osir Kassif, who is the only one who has openly spoken against the genocide and against the occupation, but it's anecdotic. The demonstrations against Netanyahu in Israel by the Israeli society were against Netanyahu, not against occupation, or not against the treatment Palestinians receive. It's very sad, and I don't want to make generalizations, but according to different polls, most of the people in Israel approve and even consider that, for example, some people in areas close to Lebanon, they were complaining, they consider themselves second-class citizens, because in comparison to Tel Aviv, because they wanted the genocide in Lebanon and they were not having it. And why in Tel Aviv they could have it and they didn't? So that's why I said that decades and decades of socialization on racism and on colonization have a lot of effects in the daily life. And in this case, we should be critical with the Israeli left for not being left at all, to my mind.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What is the name of the leader of the Communist Party?
Osir Kassif.
He take a position against, he named the genocide with his name.
He participates in demonstrations, and he was threatened with being removed his role of MP, of member of parliament. Is exacta.
In anti-Semite.
Probably he would have received that.
Some example here, for example, Moni Ovadia, who is an actor. It's a great actor, realizzatore, regista, filmmaker. No, regista teatrale.
Teatrale,
Playwright.
And he took a very strong position. Strong, very rational position. He declared this a genocide, and he denounced the colonization, and he is accused of anti-Semitism. And he's a Jewish. He received letter. Your mother and father had to die in the concentration camp. Why you are still in life? It's incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible, because it's so very easily answered with this fact that Palestinians are also Semitic, but many people in the States, many survivors of the Holocaust, have shown as well the rejection against the genocide. They said that they didn't go through that Holocaust to support a new one. And I think it's important to take that.
But this is not something that I cannot keep exactly the fact that if you are filming the genocide, you are anti-Semitic. Which is the passage? If you are from the genocide of Palestinians, you are declared immediately anti-Semitic. Why? I don't understand the passage. No.
I think they have.
Of course, it's totally rational. I don't keep the logic of this sentence.
The logic is to transform. Well, first to make Zionism and being Jewish the same. That's the first point. And many Jewish themselves say, no, it's not the same to be Jewish than to be Zionist. You can be a Jewish, an anti-Zionist Jewish. But as you said, they are considered traitors, they are betraying their own people, blah, blah, blah. But that's the first step, to consider Semitism and Zionism, being Jewish and Zionism the same. And then being Jewish and being Semitic as completely the same, forgetting that these are two people who are included in the definition of Semitism. And transforming, I think this is the third step, transforming a political problem into a religious one. So if you criticize politics, in fact, according to them, you will be criticizing a religion and ethnicity. So if you are anti-Zionist, according to them, you would be anti-Semitic, and that includes only being anti-Jewish as a religious or ethnic critique instead of a political one. So it has many terms that we should dismantle.
Because it's automatic now. It's if you say in public that is a genocide, of course we can say that, but because we are in a room, and if you write that on a journal
On social media,
paper, immediately you are accused to be an anti-Semitic. So
it's a triumph of the Hasbara, and says that it's very well studied, and they triumph in this sense. But I hope that more and more people understand these details. Okay, thank you very much.